I love this cottagecore dress so much. I just want to run away from modern life and live on a farm. It'll be so peaceful.
So you want to wake up at dawn every day and have to clean your entire kitchen before breakfast?
Well, I suppose I could learn to be a morning person.
You want to spend your days chasing after animals in bad weather? Getting covered in mud and who knows what else?
In this dress? No way!
You want to haul every ounce of water your house uses for cooking or bathing from the well with your own arms. How much water are we talking? Hope you don't like long showers. Or any showers. Or full baths. What am I supposed to do with this? It's completely impractical. You keep it. Look, I love a good floaty linen dress as much as the next historical costumer. I love a good historical house as much too. I love going out and enjoying nature, well, probably not as much as the next person, but I do certainly see the appeal. There's no question that cottagecore has become as popular as it has out of a desire for a more gently paced lifestyle, a nostalgia for simpler times, for peace and quiet and softness and connection with natural beauty. The world is going through it right now. Of course we want some escapism and coziness in the areas of our lives where we can get it. And cottagecore is intrinsically linked with historical fashion in many ways. The aesthetics are inspired by fashions from the past that we associate with these old-timey countryside settings we're collectively dreaming of. What's more, there have actually been a number of cottagecore fashion movements throughout history. From the arts and crafts and aesthetic dress styles of the Victorian era to Marie Antoinette's shepherdess fashions and escape to the Petit Trianon, to the timeless trends of pastoral themes in theater and literature, as far back as the ancient Greeks, historical people shared our desire to escape the relentless grind of daily life for a simpler, kinder, more natural lifestyle in a cottage in the countryside. Unless, of course, that is, they already lived in one. Hi, I'm V, fashion historian who loves pretty aesthetics, but loves learning about the reality behind them even more. See, the thing about cottagecore is this. Actually living on a farm is hard work. It's messy. It's exhausting. It's not always dreamy or simple or peaceful. And for much of history, for much of the population, there wasn't any other option. An overwhelming majority of the population of Europe were subsistence farmers, peasants, in the Middle Ages, and were restricted to this status by both legal and economic factors. Even after the feudal system broke down in most of Europe, farming and country life continued to be hard work that ordinary people born into had few alternatives to. So why, time and time again, have we romanticized these lifestyles into cottagecore-like art and fashions? And how can we enjoy the good things in cottagecore, the peace, the softness, the beautiful clothes and aesthetics, without falling victim to the same damaging patterns we see in history? Let's be honest, I am not a rurally inclined person. I love my modern urban comforts, my well-insulated condo, my modern heated plumbing, my convenient electricity. Heck, I recently went cabin camping for a weekend of folk dancing, and despite being in what looked like a magical forest, I cannot tell you how happy I was to come home to my comfy modern bed afterwards. So thanks to this video's sponsor, Birch Living, for providing me with such a great mattress to come home and crash on. Birch makes mattresses crafted with organic and natural materials that have been sustainably sourced. April is Earth Month, and a good time to think about the everyday ways we can live more sustainably, as well as the pretty #aesthetic ones. Birch mattresses don't use polyurethane foams or fiberglass. They own their manufacturing facility and keep it entirely free from fiberglass because it can be harmful. Instead, they use natural materials that accomplish the same things, like 100% organic wool, which is flame-resistant, hypoallergenic, and biodegradable. The Birch Luxe mattress has one of the longest list of third-party environmental and safety certifications I've ever seen on a textile product. GOTS certified, Green Guard Gold, Fair Trade, Forest Stewardship Council. The Luxe mattress is made of 8 different layers of organic wool, organic cashmere, organic cotton, and 100% natural latex, with a quilted pillow top for the perfect balance of softness and support. It's the perfect combination of good things from the past, like biodegradable natural materials, with modern innovations in manufacturing, sustainability, and ethical sourcing. I'm getting on 2 years with my Birch Luxe mattress, and I would still rather sleep here than anywhere else, even if I'm off in the redwoods and even if it looks like an enchanted forest out there. Birch mattresses have a 25-year warranty, so you can look forward to many years of great sleep. And if it doesn't work out, Birch offers a 100-night sleep trial. They'll even deliver your mattress right to your door, rolled up in a box. My tiny, disabled self only needed a little help to unpack it and set it up. For bonus convenience, Birch also offers in-home setup and removal. I love my Birch mattress, and I think you would too. If you're looking to upgrade your sleep, it is the perfect time to check out Birch Living. You can get 20% off a Birch mattress plus 2 free EcoRest pillows by visiting my link, birchliving.com/SnappyDragon.
I just want to lounge in my peaceful fairy boudoir, basking in natural beauty and...
Get back in here, we have work to do!
But I want to stay in bed!
Great! You can stay in bed and write the Patreon post while I finish filming.
Fine. But only because if enough people join the Patreon, it'll pay for me to run away and live my cottagecore dream.
Those'll have to be some real good Patreon posts. More realistically, if you want bibliographies and bonus content, go to patreon.com/SnappyDragonStudios. It won't pay for anyone's cottagecore fantasies, but it will keep me supplied with tea and cookies so I can keep making videos and occasionally take naps. Alright, so I am absolutely not the first fashion historian to call attention to how old cottagecore is. Karolina Zabrowska put out a great video on that a few years back. It's really old. Cottagecore, not her video. Like ancient Greece old. It just didn't show up as much in fashion until more recently. The pastoral is a genre or aesthetic that comes up over and over in different times and places, in visual art, music, theater, and literature or poetry. Hesiod's Works and Days is considered one of the first examples of pastoral literature in the Western tradition, and its content is telling, although Theocritus's ideals seem to be better known. The target audience is usually urban and or upper class people with no direct experience of doing agricultural work. Think about it. If you live in a big cramped city, which was a thing that existed in history, with relatively little of what modern people call green space, the idea of getting to spend your time outside in nature with cute fluffy animals can be really appealing. I live in a big urban area that's lucky to have lots of gorgeous natural spaces nearby, and hiking is so popular here there are jokes about it.
Like, if someone's Tinder bio says they like hiking, it means they don't have anything interesting to say about themselves.
And this is why we don't use Tinder. Moving on. Most of these people, the target audience of pastoral genre arts, are not thinking about the labor involved in keeping track of large numbers of animals that behave as though they have wool in their brains as well as on their backs, or about doing all of this in foul weather. From Scott Hess's fascinating paper on the postmodern pastoral genre, although it calls for a return to nature, however, pastoral has never called for an actual return to the challenges of earning a subsistence from the natural world. Basically, it's about as realistic as going camping with no bugs. The art is not generally aimed at or appealing to people who do agricultural work. And when you think about it, you can pretty easily see why. People who actually lived rurally are going to spot the gaps between the fantasy and the reality, not to mention being less interested in the story to begin with. It doesn't have that distance from their daily life that makes cottagecore or pastoral genre art appealing to those who live in urban areas. Moving into the early modern era in the West, pastoral genre art made some of its first inroads into fashion through theater. Some of Shakespeare's plays definitely fit the bill. As You Like It, in particular, about a noblewoman running away to the forest because of dangerous court intrigues. From Hess's paper again, in early modern pastoral, disguised courtiers are always the exemplary pastoral shepherds, or swains, excelling in the proper pastoral graces of song, leisure, and social manners, while in the instances where actual shepherds are represented, they tend only to offer comic and boorish foils for the aristocratic protagonists. And it didn't remain on the stage. Masks were popular forms of courtly entertainment for royal and noble households, where a combination of professional entertainers and members of the court would stage a simple drama. These often included singing, dancing, poetic monologues, and costumes, all layered in with the political nuances of courtly life. Sir Philip Sidney's The Lady of May is a good example of a pastoral court masque which contains a lot of political commentary, and specifically cast both courtiers and professional entertainers designers in various roles. It stages a debate between stock characters, shepherds and foresters, and invites Queen Elizabeth to choose which the titular lady should marry. Playing at being rustic country folk was fun, but it was done in such a way that no one ever forgot the aristocracy was the aristocracy. Pastoral does not, for the most part, represent actual working people. Its stylized world is completely mannered and thus excludes what its sophisticated consumers would consider the coarseness of actual rustic language and manners. It took another century or so for pastoral genre art to have much of an influence on fashion, and I think this distinction is why. Without some of the means of the rich obviously being still the rich, such as using expensive fabrics that became more available through the 17th and 18th centuries, a person dressing in pastoral fashions might risk actually being mistaken for a lower class or agricultural worker, which would be unacceptable. There's a certain amount of this fashion that was only appealing if everyone understood that you were dressing to something that you didn't live. Actually wearing lower class clothes would be incredibly gauche, but wearing country styles in expensive materials like fine cotton or silk was stylish. So this is where we get the shepherdess costume seen on high status women in 18th century art. Certain archetypes or stylistic features mark these as pastoral costumes rather than actual country people's clothes. Bodices with no sleeves over very full chemises in expensive materials, exaggerated lacing and eyelets, skirts looped up over underskirts in specific styles of drapery rather than for work and to avoid dirt. The late 18th century robe à la polonaise and other fashions from that era with looped up skirts may have been inspired by a Polish folk costume or peasant clothes. Or it may have been a fashion set by a Polish queen. Or a political statement about the partition of Poland. Doesn't seem like there's any clear consensus, and it might have been all three. This very contrived semi-reconstruction of rural or peasant styles reminds me so much of modern cottagecore's tendency to be very contrived and stylized, even alongside narratives of imperfection or shabbiness. The proclaimed lack of tension between the idea of something being beautiful but not being perfect, expensive, pristine, etc., is incredibly appealing to anyone who feels the pressure to be perfect. But the cottagecore aesthetic is still purposefully constructed, still creates an ideal that would take a lot of effort to live up to, and it often doesn't involve true shabbiness. Decorating or mending with pretty floral embroidery? Great. A straightforward patch job because you can't afford the money or time for something prettier? Not so fashionable. This contrived, artificially constructed fantasy of rural life is part of why Marie Antoinette's Hameau de la Reine is one of the most discussed examples of historical cottagecore. The Hameau de la Reine is what's called an ornamental farm, and it's not the first one in Western Europe, only perhaps the best known. These sorts of farm theme parks set up by the aristocracy on their estates go at least as far back as the 1730s, with Woburn Farm in England being an early example. It's not that they weren't functioning farms that did real agriculture, it's that the aristocracy got to treat them as these sorts of escapist vacations from reality, only doing as much of the farm management as they enjoyed as a pastime. Marie Antoinette did not actually have her livelihood depend on how good she was at farming. She paid people for that. And it's very understandable that she would want an escape from the rigidity and constant scrutiny of life at the French court. These are human needs and human responses to stressful circumstances. The clothes she and her friends wore during their time at the Hameau de la Reine reflect the desire for simplicity and ease and softness. The robe à la polonaise was often worn there, and so was the iconic chemise dress that Marie Antoinette popularized, with all its complex and layered history. This is definitely a historical cottagecore dress, and a large number of modern cottagecore styles are visually similar. I spoke a little bit about this garment when I made a gothic one for my friend Sarah back in 2020, and at Noodle.Stitch did some really great research on the chemise dress around the same time. To sum up, it was a style that originated with Black women in the French colonized regions of the Americas, which was adopted and modified by the white French colonizer women because it suited the climate better. It then made its way into mainstream European fashion when Marie Antoinette popularized it. This caused quite a stir both because of its origins and because it resembled an undergarment. the chemise, but was eventually integrated and evolved into those cute white cotton Regency dresses we've all seen. And there was an element of, friskiness in the appeal of these 18th century pastoral fashions. Even before the chemise dress, the pastoral-style shepherdess costumes we see in art were a bit daring. Karolina Zabrowska described this well in her video, that the sleeveless bodices leaving exposed chemise sleeves were, in essence, a way to show a garment usually only seen in intimate settings, while keeping an excuse to shield the wearer from social censure. In essence, they were kind of like the sexy insert profession costumes of the 18th century. This was maybe not the end of the world for rich women to play spicy dress-up, but there was a lot of sexualization of peasant women that crossed the line into downright creepiness. Lower-class women, like shepherdesses and other farm workers, would not have the social power to easily stand up to people of quality. And y'all can fill in the blanks about why certain individuals with cruddy ethics would find that sort of power differential appealing. Dairymaids in particular were especially sexualized. The historian Ruth Goodman describes this in some detail in her Victorian farm series. Tess of the Dubervilles is a literary example, although the novel itself is highly critical of this archetype. According to Goodman, dairymaids had to be exceptionally clean and conscious of hygiene due to their profession. So all the creepy, unethical appeal of sexualizing a peasant woman, but with none of the dirt that usually came with agricultural work.
Ew.
The dirt?
No, everything else about it.
You are not wrong. But let's speak to some slightly less icky aspects of 19th century cottagecore. It brought us some amazing art and clothes. I've got an entire video already on the pre-Raphaelite movement, a group of mid-19th century artists that grew into an entire artistic movement later in the era. They loved depicting historical and fantasy aesthetics, and since art was one of the dominant visual media of the 19th century, it had a really cool interplay with fashion. Where we have Instagram, the Victorians had paintings. There's been a lot of scholarship done on whether the women of the pre-Raphaelite movement, mind, they were often artists in their own right, not just models or partners, actually dressed in the flowy medieval fantasy styles of clothing shown in the paintings, and the answer is sort of. When one looks at photos of prominent women in the movement, such as this one of Jane Morris, her outfit looks very fantasy-like to the modern eye. But you take a second look, and it turns out this is a fairly standard mid-Victorian dress. It's got the gathered shoulders into a fan front bodice, wide pagoda sleeves, and a full gathered skirt. It just looks more like a fantasy or cottagecore dress because it doesn't have a hoop skirt under it to get that characteristic 1860s bell-shaped silhouette. You can see this in some of the paintings too. Rossetti's The Girlhood of Mary Virgin is a religious scene done in a medieval art style, but the dress worn by this figure looks like a mid-19th century dress, complete with buttons up the front. Again, without the voluminous petticoats. The models were his mother and his sister, the poet Christina Rossetti, and it seems likely they used clothes from their real wardrobes. It wasn't just everyday or contemporary daily wear garments that got restyled either. Jane Morris modeled for Proserpine, and she was painted in a very sumptuous deep blue robe that Crow's Eye Productions have done a really cool recreation of. It also appears in a different Rossetti painting that Jane Morris modeled for, and there are plenty of extant dressing robes with similar drape and design features. The early pre-Raphaelite movement took contemporary 19th century clothes and restyled them into pastoral art, but it was the closely connected arts and crafts movement that took pastoral aesthetics and brought them into contemporary fashion. William Morris was the central figure of this movement, which focused on preserving, reviving, and popularizing traditional hand-done craftsmanship in all sorts of decorative arts, from architecture to interior design to textiles and more. I do still want to do a deep dive on William Morris's politics and the social influences of the arts and crafts movement, and sadly, this is not that video, but it'll happen one day. Morris seems to have intended to honor the labor involved in traditional crafts, and was really devoted to the idea of artisans being able to derive joy from practicing their craft. Creative freedom and expression, and the satisfaction of things well made and work well done. This, he argued, is what separated work from drudgery. The resulting aesthetic really liked showing the handmade nature of objects. Hammer marks on metalwork, the fluid irregular contours of some pottery and glass, and the marks of the adze or the chisel on wood or stone. These textures seen in cottagecore and shabby chic styles can be similar. Linen is much used for its slubby, organic texture and can even be stonewashed so that its tendency to wrinkle becomes a feature rather than a bug. It's like going for irregular bunches of wildflowers in improvised containers or mason jars, rather than perfect uniform bouquets in crystal vases. Again, there's this notion of beauty in the imperfection of handmade, human-made things that is very appealing to anyone who's ever felt pressure to be perfect. Likewise, the idea of celebrating the labor of something, rather than being expected to pretend you're not overworked even though you are. However, as you can imagine, capitalism doesn't leave much space for that. Once the existing social and economic power structures got their hands on these ideas, they increasingly became used for commercialized purposes. National and local government used the schools of art to improve the standard of design in local trades as a way of improving economic performance. For artists, beauty is an end in and of itself, but for industrialized forces, beauty is a way to make money. And for every source of modern cottagecore inspiration that's focused on beauty and ideas, there are at least as many trying to sell you something. And these fashionable, carefully made items are often most affordable to, you guessed it, people with more money than the rural workers whose aesthetic they emulate. The 19th century smock frock is basically a perfect example of this. Smock frocks were originally menswear garments worn for messy work, to protect the clothes underneath. Towards the beginning of the 18th century, they were most often worn by carters and wagoners. They later became a general wear poverty garment by agricultural workers in late 18th century southern Britain. John Styles' book, The Dress of the People, goes into some really interesting details about why they became more common. The characteristic smocking stitchwork that gives them their name can be incredibly intricate and beautiful. So when the influence of the pre-Raphaelites and arts and crafts movement brought them to the attention of the fashionable, the artistic and aesthetic dress styles took off running with it. Liberty's of London was a high-end department store that initially specialized in Asian imported fabrics, art, and interior decor. In 1884, the store added a costume department under the direction of Edward William Godwin, a designer associated with the arts and crafts movement. Liberty's became known for high-fashion tea gowns, luxurious casual garments that combined elements of Orientalist fashion, which is pretty but has other problems, see further reading in the description, with pastoral genre style elements like intricate smocking. Absolutely no one would mistake these high-end garments for an actual smock frock, which was still worn by working-class men in 19th century southern Britain. Even their simpler smocked tea gowns were made in expensive materials like silk, and the more ornate ones used imported fabrics and sumptuous decoration. That's what made them fashionable, taking elements of rural fashion, separating them from actual working class people, and reproducing them in luxurious contexts for people who would never experience the work those fashions developed from. This is what it comes down to. Too much of cottagecore is basically romanticizing the aesthetics of poverty. Just poverty far enough removed from the actual life experience of those romanticizing it, that the association of the aesthetic with the poverty can be broken or obscured. We don't have these nostalgic associations with modern-day signifiers of poverty or lower class, especially when we encounter them attached to modern-day people for whom they are part of reality. An interesting distinction is that while historical cottagecore-like movements mostly used class and expense to separate pastoral or cottagecore fashion from actual peasant clothes, more recent ones used time of origin as well. For instance, the hippie fashions of the 1960s and 70s included peasant blouses. These were perceived as being inspired by a previous time period rather than a variant of contemporary 1960s and 70s fashion, and this was a large part of their appeal. Likewise, many modern cottagecore styles draw their appeal from medieval, Renaissance, 18th century, or Victorian inspiration. The artistic and aesthetic dress movements are right on the edge. They tended to draw either from garments that were only just starting to be seen as old-fashioned, or following contemporary lines in many ways, but using older, simpler materials and techniques. The closest thing to romanticizing actual modern, rural, low-class farmers in bumfuck nowhere America is country music, which has less of an aesthetic or fashion component, but still runs afoul of many of the same issues with modern cottagecore. And this is one area where I think modern cottagecore has developed an issue that past pastoral genre aesthetics didn't have. It seems like older cottagecore movements either didn't carry particular social or political connotations. Yes, there was a lot of dreaming of the natural utopia of Arcadia, but the actual people involved didn't have unified social views. Or, like the 19th century artistic and aesthetic subcultures, they leaned progressive, seeing themselves as moving beyond conventional fashions or ideas to move society forward based on inspiration from the past. Cottagecore has some of this. Lots of the eco-friendly practices associated with cottagecore are legitimately really good, like mending one's clothes, slow fashion, secondhand and improvised decor, even gardening and food preservation. Although it's important to remember that in the past, these were usually done out of desperation and poverty, but that's a running theme through all of it. But there's a flip side that not only romanticizes the eco-friendly practices or pretty visuals of fantasy rural life, but the good old days when men were men and women were women. The fantasy there isn't just aesthetic, it's moralistic. Unsurprisingly, there is a huge amount of white supremacy, sexism, Christian hegemony, and other patriarchal crap involved in this segment of cottagecore, which I have heard referred to as the cottagecore to tradwife pipeline. A lot of cottagecore is home-centric. It's literally in the name, and directed towards women. Using nostalgia to sneakily sell far-right ideologies is not a new trick. It was actually used in World War II, which is not a can of worms I am opening in this video, but it may well get a video of its own. Tell me in the comments if you're curious. Look, if you're gonna be a tradwife, be a Jewish one. Run a successful business, go home to your bookish husband, and take a solid day off once a week. I mean, that's better, although still not my thing. And it's important to note, this doesn't devalue any of the skills involved in running a household. Heck, I put lots of time and effort into developing those skills. They are important kinds of labor that keep the world turning. And if you're gonna do them, it's good to do them in ways that bring you joy. But let me remind you all, I am a proud spinster who uses these skills on my own terms for my own happiness and to engage with my community. Not because I believe my only purpose in life is to make some man's life better. Alright, I feel like I've just spent however many minutes complaining about problems without actually talking about how to solve them. I do not think the answer is to throw out every single cottagecore and pastoral genre bit of art or fashion ever. Definitely not. These movements keep happening across art forms and times and places because they speak to a fundamentally human set of needs. So I think it's important to instead focus on what those needs really are. Do you actually want to run away and live on a farm? Or do you just really need a break? Some rest, some community care, some good homemade food, some time in beautiful natural scenery? A chance to wear clothes that are comfortable and feel pretty and don't carry the pressure to be perfect? A living space that feels peaceful and coordinated without costing a fortune and carrying that same pressure? Me too! Think deeper about why we like the things we like about cottagecore. How do they make us feel and why? What need do they speak to? Do they have any associations that we are ignorant of? Everything from the gap between cottagecore fantasy and the reality of farm life, to the commercialization of the aesthetic and nostalgia, to sneaky gateways to damaging ideologies. You absolutely can satisfy your aesthetic desires without falling down the rabbit hole of unjustly romanticizing the past. I am absolutely keeping my modern house, plumbing, urban neighborhood, etc., and I really love it here. But I also have a cute little garden on my balcony, and enjoy wearing soft, romantic, historical clothes, and set up my bedroom to look like the fair folk did my decorating. This is why fashion is such a popular way to do this. We can keep the things we love and need about modern life, and still enjoy the dreamy beauty of old fashions, and learn from the hard truths about history. And if you are still enchanted by the idea of running away and starting a homestead, I'll add a suggestion from my friend Pesky, who does suburban homesteading. Before you invest all your money in 100 acres with no clue what you're doing, start with a garden and some chickens on a half or full acre. It'll offer a change of pace from the urban life you're trying to escape, but on a much more manageable scale than launching into farm life because you love the aesthetic. Short of starting a homestead of any kind, I actually find the most positively impactful cottagecore content I see is from creators whose focus is not the cottagecore aesthetic. It's from people like Alexis of Black Forager, who teaches about wild foods and how to enjoy them with the most heartwarming enthusiasm and great outfits. There's also friend of the channel, Miss Wondersmith, whose work includes everything from fantastical ceramic tea sets to recipes to party planning and hosting inspiration for adding more wonder and magic to your life. And fellow historical costumer Shannon Makes, whose ability to make incredible creations out of literal trash has led to her restoring an entire house. It's delightfully gritty and uplifting at the same time. And I cannot fail to mention my friend the Pomegranate Witch, whose cottagecore inclinations are solidly grounded in the hard work of homesteading, and whose words inspired this entire video. Go look at all of their pages, please. They are better at social media than me. All right. Time for me to get off my thrifted, #aesthetic, lace-doilied soapbox. Tell me in the comments what you love or don't love about the cottagecore movements of the past and present, and share this video with your friends so they can join in too. Also, since we do still live in a capitalist hellscape instead of Arcadia, please like this video to make YouTube's robots happy, subscribe for further fashion history sass, and check out the SnappyDragon Patreon for bonus content like my source notes, monthly video sewing circles, and Discord access. You can find me around the internet at Miss SnappyDragon on Instagram, Facebook, and very occasionally TikTok. And now, it is time for me to retire to my idyllic fairy tale boudoir and take a long, fantastically restorative nap. Rest counts as cottagecore, right? If I make it aesthetic enough? I'll see what we can do. Aha!